Welcome back to the program, and now we welcome to the busy Minuteman Press guest line today, the Deputy Counsel for the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, Lucas Vebber. Good morning, Lucas.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you here to talk about regulations. We've kind of been, it folds into the whole conversation about affordability as well, which is a big deal for most Wisconsinites, and polling across the country shows that we're not feeling good about how we can afford the things we want to be able to eat and drive and live in, and all those items. Regulations bear at least part of the responsibility for increasing costs, and they also can stifle business development in areas, and it's time to maybe take a look at that. You've been following some developments in the state legislature. Tell us a little bit about what's happening there.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me on. There's a package of bills that we have been supporting. The ideas of the bills for years, and then this package was introduced early in the session this year. We're calling it the Red Tape Reset legislative package. Just some simple reforms that will go a long way to improving Wisconsin. Wisconsin has the 13th most regulatory restrictions in the country. We are one of the most heavily regulated states in America. I think all too often when this topic comes up, people will just immediately say, "Oh, if you want to get rid of regulations, you're just hurting safety, or it's just unsafe. You can't do that." And I think that's a false choice. I think certainly we all understand that there are some regulations that are absolutely necessary to protect health and welfare. But over time, those regulations become stale. They become overly burdensome. They don't keep up with what the market needs, and we need to review those over time. And that's exactly what this bill package would do.
I am well aware of what you brought up there with the argument being, well, we need to regulate so that people are safe in the things that they do and participate in. That's probably always a moving target, is it not? And is there a sort of a litmus test as to where you install a safety regulation and where you don't?
Yeah, I think there is no litmus. I think it is always changing and always evolving, right? As technology evolves, what's safe and what's unsafe is going to evolve too, and we need to keep up with it because people need to be safe. One of the bills in this package is a 7-year sunset of administrative rules. Right now in Wisconsin, if an agency adopts a rule, that rule stays on the books forever. It comes off only if somebody goes out of their way to explicitly repeal it. It's treated like law. What this bill would do is it says, hey, every 7 years, agencies are going to have to redo these rules. They're just going to take a look at them, make sure they're still necessary. There's a quick process in the bill where if they want to keep the rule, they have to keep it. But what it does is it forces those agencies to go through that review process, and it forces the legislature to take a look as well. And that's important just to shine some light on these to make sure our administrative code is as fresh as possible. That's a pretty simple, straightforward reform. And then along with that, to help with some family budgeting issues, because regulations do drive up the cost of doing business. We've put out studies saying that this is, billions of dollars in costs that get added unnecessarily to the economy here in Wisconsin and nationally. One of the other bills in the package requires what we call regulatory budgeting. So agencies would only be able to propose new rules if they simultaneously identify offsetting cost reductions. And there is also a safety valve in there because sometimes if there is a regulation that absolutely needs to come into place that's going to increase costs and it needs to happen, the legislature is able to approve those on a one-off basis as well. So, those two reforms together will not only keep our code, our administrative code and regulations modernized, but it'll ensure that those regulations don't overburden Wisconsin families and businesses.
All right. In the ranking of the 13th most regulated state, if we went to the 49th most regulated state, Lucas, what are some of the distinct differences that people might notice there?
Yeah, so I think one of the least regulated states in America is the state of Idaho. They've gone through a lot of what we're proposing here. They've done there in terms of sunsetting their regulations and looking at it. You certainly don't see any of the horror stories that some opponents here would bring up. You don't see that playing out, and I think that's the real important thing here is that across the spectrum of Wisconsin or of the United States, where we've got the most regulated states to the least regulated states. You don't hear horror stories coming from these least regulated states about all these terrible things happening. It's just not. It just doesn't exist. And so, I think we can learn those best practices and understand how are some states able to keep people safe and effectively manage their economy in a way that doesn't overly burden. And we need to spread that everywhere and make sure that everybody can benefit from those processes. And that's what this bill package would do for Wisconsin.
Is there in Wisconsin an egregious area where there are more regulations that are causing more, causing less development, I guess, or more unaffordability, or is it kind of spread across the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there was it used to be in Wisconsin that the legislature, up until, really just over a year ago, the legislature in Wisconsin had a lot of oversight power on the rulemaking process. Our governor filed a lawsuit at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declared some of those oversight powers unconstitutional. And so they don't have as much power to stop those rules as they used to. Once that happened, we saw various state agencies immediately implement or attempt to implement some new reforms. One example was the livestock fees that they imposed, which were magnitudes of 1,000 times higher, more than 1,000 times higher was what was being proposed. I think these are some of the things that agencies do when they're unelected agency staff officials that write these rules with no accountability to the public. If an agency staff member writes a rule and people don't like it, well, it's too bad because the public has no control over that agency official. They have civil service protections. Mm-hmm. Whereas if a lawmaker writes a rule, you can go elect a new lawmaker. And the whole point in this bill package is to say those types of rules, those contentious rules, they don't stay on the books forever. And if you're going to write those kinds of rules that are expensive, you're going to have to offset it with cost savings. And that's, again, what the whole point of this bill package is, and we were certainly glad to see it pass the legislature.
Well, in the Liberty part of your organization's name, people define that somewhat differently, I know, but largely the ability to kind of do what you want, make a living for yourself, stake a claim, all those old-fashioned types of terms. The swelling of regulations flies in the face of the concept of liberty overall, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since time immemorial, people have recognized that you have the right to earn an honest living, free from unreasonable and arbitrary government constraints, right? I mean, everybody recognizes that you have the right to work. You can go out and do work and do a job as long as, and there's going to be government regulation and sometimes, mm-hmm. and, you can't do anything you want, of course, but people have the right to work and the right to do certain things. And yeah, absolutely. Government regulations cripple that. And oftentimes you see regulators, which we would call captive regulators, who are regulators that are really controlled by the industry they're regulating. And a lot of times these regulations become box-them-out regulations where they want to keep competition out of the industry, or, they raise barriers to entry, or they, favor incumbents, things like that. And those are the types of regulations that we need to get off the books, but oftentimes it's very difficult because you have, entrenched special interests who like these regulations and want to keep them. So if you have a regular review process, it just makes it easier to shine some light on these regulations, that removing them would only benefit the marketplace and consumer choice by giving them more opportunity. And that's exactly what this legislation does.
The package has passed in the Senate, as I understand it. Obviously, we're not going to get it over to the Assembly and passed. So this is going to have to ride the merry-go-round around another rotation, is it not?
Well, it actually did. It did pass the Assembly last week. So on Thursday, yeah.
So, it's actually bound for the governor's desk?
Yes, all four of these bills will be sent to the governor's desk as part of the legislative package of bills. The next time the governor gets sent bills from the legislature, they'll be a part of it.
And what is the temperature of the governor's office on this package?
I don't know. I don't know if the governor's spoken publicly on it yet. Would certainly hope that the governor, understands the good that this can have for the economy and is willing to sign these bills into law, or at least not veto them. And we can go from there, because this legislation will have a tremendously positive impact on our state going forward. And it's the kind of thing that we need, especially right now, as costs are rising. And people are dealing with increased costs nationally, and there's a lot of economic uncertainty. These are pretty simple reforms that we can do to really give Wisconsin a shot in the arm.
All right. I know your organization is not necessarily a bunch of number crunchers. You're more policy-oriented, but is there any estimate as to what impact this might have on residents of Wisconsin if the package is signed into law?
Yeah, we've done some looks at that in terms of what just baseline reduction in the number of regulations could do generally, based on what we've seen in other states and things like that. And we've got some of those numbers. I don't have them directly in front of me right now, but depending on how many regulations get reduced, that number rises, and it's starting somewhere in the billions if we introduce this, and it goes up from there over time. And that's just, as you get lower regulations, you're going to have more economic activity. More economic activity leads to more jobs, job growth. It's higher tax base for the state of Wisconsin. It's really a win-win situation for everyone here in Wisconsin.
Does the sunsetting of the regulations that is contained within the bill, that function of the bill, does that then apply to every regulation currently in existence and start a clock running, or is it just new stuff that comes online?
Yeah, so it would require them to set a calendar, a schedule for all the existing regulations, and then would apply to everything new going forward as well. So all current regulations would have a clock set on them. There'd be a schedule put in place by which those current regulations would begin to expire going forward. So,
all right,
it would, yeah.
Well, I think it's like anything that you leave on autopilot forever. Eventually, some stuff needs attention. I don't know why that would be a cause of resistance necessarily. I realize that the idea that this could be called a package of deregulation bills might scare people into thinking that, well, we're going to be sacrificing something. But in your opinion, does this package do this in a responsible way so that all of a sudden, we aren't, removing the requirement of seatbelts from cars or something that's proven to be good safety policy?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly why this package is so positive. I mean, these are proven reforms that have worked elsewhere, and so bringing them to Wisconsin is it's common sense, simple reforms that we can do to improve our state. And again, these are state regulations, right? So there's still, of course, federal regulations. Those are handled differently. Those are all still in place. These don't affect any of that. These are just the state regulations that are layered on top of those. So, the goal again is just to keep those regulations that we need, get rid of those regulations that are outdated or need to be revamped, and just do it in a responsible way that benefits our economy. And it's also going to help our existing regulators. There's going to be less things that they have to look at as well. I mean, they're going to be able to focus on the regulations that actually matter and spend their time appropriately as well. So,
does it address the issue you mentioned a little bit earlier as it relates to just agencies arbitrarily being able to create rules and regulations, or is that still bound to happen, and the legislature, by enacting this, will just at least force a review of it?
Yeah, that's still in place. That kind of issue exists separately, and the legislature has proposed a constitutional amendment to address that. But what this does is it says, hey, even though these agencies have virtually unlimited power now to adopt rules because of that Supreme Court decision, at the very least, those rules would have an expiration date, and they would have to be, looked at over time, and that's an important distinction.
Well, and at some point, even if you're not, directly accountable to the people through a vote, you can still, communicate with elected officials who oversee those agencies, and get involved when those things may come up for review. It's better than never reviewing them.
Exactly, and there's actually one bill in this package that'll help with that review and helps kind of the public at large with that review. And that's a fee-shifting statute. So under current law, if there's an illegal agency regulation that's in place, which does happen, and you were to file a lawsuit and have that regulation declared illegal, basically the court would say this agency, yes, did something wrong here. You have to pay your own way on that. So if you win, you go through the entire process, maybe even go all the way up to the state Supreme Court, talking six figures in legal bills to get that declared unlawful. You can't recover your costs under current law. You're just stuck paying that bill. As a result, we have very few people who are willing to challenge unlawful agency regulations, or at least challenge them enough to the point where they can have some kind of long-term effect. One of the bills in this package would allow individuals who challenge those suits to recover their fees at the back end of the suit. Now, our organization is one of the few that brings these suits regularly, and that's because we don't charge our clients. We don't rely on attorney fees. We do it because we're a nonprofit. What this would do is it would incentivize those for-profit lawyers, other law firms, to bring these types of cases and really hold these agencies accountable. It's a pretty simple measure, again, that can help ensure that those state agencies, which are going to, if they break the law, they would start getting hit with attorney fee awards. Hold them accountable and make sure that they're toeing the line as well.
All right. Interesting stuff. Well, so what we're going to be waiting for now is news on whether the governor actually signs this package or parts of it or none of it.
Exactly. Yep. That'll be the next step, and we should know in the coming weeks.
Okay. Hey, Lucas, appreciate the information. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on.
All right.
Have a great day.
Lucas Vebber, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty